Cool. So, hello and welcome to KCP community meeting. Today is May 22nd. Uh, Today Marvin is traveling, so I will be your host. Um, as always, this community is governed by CNCF Code of Conduct, which boils down to be excellent to each other. And if you're usually, if you're up to, please add your attendees name and surname and handler to the document. And if you are new to the community, if you're new to this call, welcome. And if you want to introduce yourself, we open floor now for, let us know if you want to give a small intro. We'll go once, twice. Cool. So if nobody wants to jump in, let's maybe jump into our agenda because we have quite a lot today to discuss. So first one is Mainz and Marco. So let me maybe share a screen where the conversation is, and we can try to discuss it with a background. So we've been through the long-running effort to extend one of the primitives in KCP, so API exports and API bindings, with a more granular permission model. And there's multiple steps involved, but one of the things is that we want to allow people to start claiming not only resources as a whole based on a group and resources, but include the permissions we can, service provider and service consumer can use to interact with the resources. And the decision was made to follow the Kubernetes verbs practices, like existing verbs, to make it mentally more acceptable for the people coming from Kubernetes to understand what is what. But there is an open question now that in a Kubernetes historically, these verbs, they kind of matches together, meaning the list, get, and watch, all of them are in a way read actions which allow you to access the object and access the content. And the same with create and patch, which both of them allow you to modify the object. Where this historically was, and still is okay in a kubeland, because if you compromise on read and, let's say, you don't want people to update an object, you don't give create permission. Sorry, different way. If you don't want to give people to update, permission to update an object, you don't give update. But if by mistake you gave patch, they can still execute update. And in a single cluster context, that's not a big issue because basically usually it's a one customer, one user domain, same company. So the idea was in a KCP land to prevent people giving only list or only get. And basically, if you're giving get, you have to give all three of them or not, implying making sure that people don't make these mistakes. And basically limit how this on the admission. This is not yet currently in a code. We landed the verbs and we said we're gonna discuss this in a more details. Do we really want to deviate from kube where every of those verbs can be used independently? Or we want to introduce this constraint in KCP to bundle them together? Marco, did I miss anything?
Not really. I would add one thing to that is that this is really about patch, because with patch, aside that you can update the resource, you actually get create, and that's what's the problem, because you can create a resource by doing patch. This is what is not, let's say, apparent to some people. The thing with list, get, and watch, I think those should definitely be decoupled and they shouldn't require each other. Maybe for watch, I'm not sure, but like you can use list and get on their own, and there are somewhat valid use cases for that. So that's the only thing that I would add. Stefan has a hands up.
There's this connection to KubeBind, right? If we want to make them align in KubeBind, we cannot distinguish between list, get, watch. I think one motivation was to have a simpler model where both overlap.
Yes, for us, it's a KubeBind, but in general, as soon as you start interacting with something outside of KCP too, and yes, like it's a.
And just to make one thing clear, we are not necessarily saying we want read, create, delete, update as new verbs, right? It's about bundling them,
Yes,
which means you still use the verbs you have here, but if you say patch, you must say create and update.
Yes, that's the idea.
And similarly for create, yeah.
And this allows other systems to be integratable with other systems like Crossplane, like KubeBind, where we don't use in other places these cube verbs. So I think it's a question basically to everybody. Do we want to bundle them and not to allow people use only list or only get? Basically, only allow use this in this couple, in these pairs. And maybe those pairs are wrong if you can use patch to create. Like, I think we're right, but yeah.
And if we go that route and we restrict, it's not a one-way door, right? We could do that at the moment. So the question is there a use case for finer grained permissions? If there was, we could consider to opening it up, but we could start restricted without losing anything.
So that was my argument too. Like thinking it's always easier to relax permissions than to tighten them in the long run. So I prefer to start with as locked as tight system as we can. And yes, if there is a use case, we can always relax. So question would be to people like, is there already a use case where this needs to be relaxed?
I mean,
and it's about API
use case would be it.
Second, go ahead.
Marvin, go ahead. I know you're traveling. You can type in the chat if you have
I mean,
travel.
it's an API bindings. Okay.
Yeah.
The claims are in bindings, but it's about
Backwards.
But it's about the virtual workspace, right? So it's about a service provider accessing a virtual workspace of an export.
Yeah. So it's about what permissions you give to the service provider to your workspace via API binding export. Yeah, but to answer to Marvin's question is, Like, I don't think we're not saying let's not use Kubernetes semantics. We're saying it's still kube semantics, just these bundles must be always provided. So meaning if you ask for patch, the admission webhook would say, please provide update to, because then they must be provided together.
And also for the user, right? The user has to accept the claim. And if a tool wants to show the claim, it's very complicated if it says, okay, the service provider wants patch. The user will not understand that patch actually means create.
Yeah, that's a good call.
So
Like
it
if
simplifies the other side a lot.
But I think that's the tool's responsibility to, explain that what these permissions mean.
but that's the thing. It means update or create. They like
I would agree with Marvin there that we are trying to fix the knowledge gaps, and that shouldn't be up to us because we will reach many gaps over the time,
yeah.
and then we will eventually diverge more and more from Kubernetes.
It's not about diverging. We don't diverge here. We are adding a feature, and we are saying we only want to take those pieces, but fully follow kube semantics. We don't diverge. This doesn't exist in kube. There's no export, no claim.
Okay, sure.
I-
There are no exporting claims, but there are verbs and roles and cluster roles that are working the way they are working right now.
But it's not about cluster roles. In cluster roles, you can do that, but those are not cluster roles. Those are claims. It's a different thing.
Yes, but people will apply what they know to.
But they
Cluster,
can.
so-
That's the whole point of the approach. They can apply and they get a useful error message, which tells them exactly patch means create, so better put create here as well. In kube, we cannot fix it. In kube, it's a failure from the past. We can't fix it. We would likely do it today.
Okay, but if we say patch, okay, you have to put create and update, that's fair enough. I mean, that's the way it works. And we say for watch, you have to provide list and get, because that's also fair enough. Why we would couple things like that if you ask for list, that you also need get, like that makes no sense.
What is the use case for a list only or get only claim?
Get only, you can only get the specific resource, like you can only access that resource. With list, you can only get a list without seeing what's inside the resource.
That's a good
Like-
argument. Does this mean get alone is okay?
Yeah, it should be okay.
But list alone is not so helpful, right?
It can be. I mean, you still can use list alone to list the resources to get the list of them, but not to get the specific resource.
But list will already include the object itself. So you kind of already have access to that data.
That's the interesting one. Yeah, now I'm thinking about that as well, but we will
Same
have
with-
to test it out.
I
Same
think for
with
list,
watch.
get watch is really about the kubebind example or crossplane, whatever we use. Because we don't want to encourage exports which are without watch. Because they don't work, they break.
Yeah.
So it's a different argument.
So
So
because
I have
go ahead.
so I have a question on this one. If it's specific to like Kubebind or like other tools, shouldn't like the Kubebind integration, like a hypothetical Kubebind integration or hypothetical crossplane something, bring a webhook to validate these things? Should we really restrict this in core?
But it gets back to where's the use case of a fine-grained model? I don't see any.
I mean,
No.
so
If we
for
had
example,
that, we could. Yeah.
I mean, so for example, get only permissions I've frequently seen because we like in our products wanted to scope down that, like a component can read one specific secret and that's it.
Mhm.
No, so
You have to know the name, basically. If not, you cannot access it.
no, like I
You
think
get a name.
yeah. I think it makes sense. Like get only makes sense. List get doesn't make sense. So for people who are not aware, in my opinion, one of the mistakes in Cube is that list is not a shallow list. It gives you full object. Like where in API designs, usually when you list, you get like name, namespace, and some metadata, but you don't get the body of the object. Where Cube doesn't have it. Like if you list, you get a full object. So it's the same as get, basically. And same.
And watch is something I think a user of a binding cannot really understand, right? It doesn't make any difference whether the other side does get this or watch. Get is has a use, but if there is list, watch is the technical detail of the service provider.
So
Yeah.
what Marvin said, sorry, but yeah, I'm now more worried that we are building around some set of products that we know about, and then, someone will actually come and say, we need this because for any reason, and then we will come to the point that we will have to decide if we want to change it. And then we will get in the problem again in the original products, in QBind, in Crossplane, especially from the QBind point when it becomes more mature, and it's going to be harder to change it. So I feel like it's easier. Let's start more flexible. Because if we start non-flexible, then we will build other tools and products with in mind that it is not flexible. And then we might run into the problems when it becomes more flexible.
No, it's a.
I
I
don't
think
buy
it's a
that
different
argument.
one.
Yeah.
It's like idea is think of this like this. All the stuff enables people to build on top. Like nobody ever in a nice development platform, nice UI, should be able to see these things. What we should be seeing is like, hey, Mr. User, do you want to have read access to this platform, to this object, delete access to this object, or create update? Like these are primitives mature development platform would be operating with. And we're saying, let's constrain to these DX primitives at the core until somebody provides a valid use case not to have them. Because it will, when we start developing QBind, in our case, because this still sits under same community, we're going to have to solve this problem.
And there's no solution if we make it open.
Bringing your own webhook and having additional maintenance.
Yeah, exactly. And it's we can open it up, but if we don't see a use case now, why should we?
So
Like we don't. It's not a one-way street. If a use case shows up, we can still do that and somehow break QBind for this use case.
I have a different proposal. What about if we add a permanent feature flag for this? Basically, bundled by default, enabled. And if people really want relaxed ones in their platforms, they have to run it with feature flag disabled.
But again, there's no use case. If we cannot come up with a use case, why should we go that route? Just because role bindings look different. Or roles, actually.
I like the feature flag idea, but I wouldn't do it now. As Stefan said, until we don't get a use case, sure. But then we have then that should be documented so we have idea what is possible if that ever comes up.
So let's just, if we go with these blocks which I redocumented, meaning if you ask get, you can get by default, like alone. If you ask list, you must provide list and get. If you ask for watch, you have to provide all three. So these like how many 6 blocks out there. If you ask for update, you must provide patch 2. So what we're saying is, if we want to keep it non-blocked, we need a use case where only watch is needed or only update is needed.
I would even merge list get and watch list get. Because this is a technical detail for the service provider. I get the get use case.
Yeah.
This makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, I have to ask something because this proposal comes before I actually started working with KCP. Why then we don't come up with, instead of verbs, we have something like permissions or I don't know, actions, and like we just implement create, update, get, and what other thing we had there, delete, instead of having cubed verbs if we want to bundle that, because that way we make a clear difference that this is not 100% the same thing.
It still is the same thing. I argue against that. This is cube semantics. A request maps via request info to those verbs. And we follow them 100%. We use the same authorizer. Everything is the same.
Okay,
Not
yeah, that
different.
makes sense. Okay, we can do that. If everyone is okay with that, I don't really mind adding that as well.
So which blocks you were, Stefan, you said merge list
Oh,
get to,
the second and third I would merge.
so means if you're asking for list, you must provide list get watch.
And
Okay.
get is a special case because it's a real use case.
Yeah, okay.
But-
Delete update, but
Why do you have to provide patch with create?
Because patch can create.
I think it's the other way around. Like the block is simply written down wrong. Like when you ask for patch, you also need to ask for update and create. Not when you like get update,
Oh,
you need
yeah.
to ask for patch.
Good point. So create alone. Oh no, other way around. Create alone should be allowed, right?
Update also.
Oh, okay.
So
I see what you mean. Yeah. So there are more combinations.
yeah, means like create alone is allowed, delete alone is allowed, but you ask for update,
Then you must, yeah.
patch. Same if you ask for,
Update patch create. Create. Where cursors. If there is patch, then. Oh, what does it mean? Update? No, sorry. Maybe I misunderstand your logic. You need an arrow. If update, then patch and create. No, then patch, not create.
basically, if any of these, okay, in here, any present,
no. Don't think in these packages and these groups that we've
Yeah.
been talking about. Think about like some verbs have dependencies.
Okay.
Like patch has a dependency in update and create.
Make an arrow behind the bold verb. Then it's clear.
you mean like
Yeah, exactly.
watch,
That's the logic. No.
That is still wrong.
I mean,
Update
yeah,
and
the
patch need to be
last
changed.
one is transitive, right? If patch, then create an update. That's missing. Still one missing.
can you get a single update?
Yeah. We don't want create when you can update, right? So it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is good.
Okay, let's, we're gonna add a comment that we need to double check, I think. I know for some of us it's end of the day and not enough coffee. Cool.
Isn't patch technical detail for update also? I
Yeah,
think
that's
patch and update are very similar in their function, and to me it sounds like they could be bundled together, which then means that create patch update would
No, I don't think it's. This is
No?
about the bold verb can do the same as everything, or as the verbs on the right side. So a patch can
I see. Okay.
replicate an update and the create. That's what it means. An update cannot do a create and cannot do the same as a patch, just half of it.
Mhm. Okay,
Yeah.
I see. Thanks.
cool. So that was interesting and informative. Okay, 30 minutes in. Second one is mine too. I will try to do it again. So long time ago, we talked about another effort is to provide the virtual resources. So there was one document written. We had quite a lot of asynchronous discussions, and I want to just to put few dots on I's before we jump to further implementation, because we need to make sure we deliver the right thing. And the goal of this is to enable service providers to distribute objects in a read-only manner to the workspaces in a pluggable way. So an example, as a compute API, you provide the compute APIs, but you want to distribute instance types as a read-only objects where people can refer them and use them. So we were thinking about implementing this publishing API, replication API. We still need to define the right name for that, where users would be able to tell which objects to publish to the cache instance or their own somewhere. Question mark, like it's bring your own stuff. And the second API is for aggregation and access to these things. So these are two different independent things. One is publishing, which is opinionated KCP way of publishing these resources for consumption. And the second one is aggregation to reflect them back into the workspace. So publishing part, idea was to introduce a new API where inside your workspace, you could provide, example, object published resources, some selectors, which would generate a hash similar way like API export. And idea is this would trigger content to be published into the cache server. And it would generate a example, published resource endpoint slice, where these objects could be accessible via virtual workspace on every shard. So it's very similar like API exports, API bindings, but it would be served from the one logical cluster in a cache server from where it was replicated, basically. So that's publishing part. At this point, if you hit this URL directly, you should be able just to see this instance types and example replicated. Second part is aggregation, where as an API export author, you could specify schema type, storage virtual, and you provide an endpoint slice selector where you could provide an arbitrary kind for endpoint slice. So predefined structure, where do I find URLs and which workspace it lives, identity hash for accessing it. some other details. But the idea is that now objects published under this endpoint slice would be reflected into your workspace once the user accepts this as a permission claim. And one could implement your own endpoint slice provider publishing from somewhere else and reflect these resources into the workspace. So that's too long, didn't read. Stefan?
Yeah, one detail, where your cursor is one line above. I would have expected a secret ref. No, where your cursor was. Go back. This one, exactly. I would have expected the secret ref to a secret having the identity. And this, of course, must match the publishing site. So on the publishing site, there must be a shared secret, so it's secure. You cannot, just by knowing the hash, you shouldn't be able to publish something in an export.
No. So one secret is like published resource generates a secret.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
And
identity.
And the hash is, exactly. The hash is there in the status, but this is not critical.
Yeah. And this, if you know this hash, you should be able to access this object published from this in a cache server.
No, I don't think this is enough. The hash is a public key, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows. The secret is a secret key. And in the export, you must have the secret.
So here we need, basically, we say secret, and that secret
ref.
is...
Yeah, and it's probably the same secret. Could be a different namespace, of course, a different workspace, but should be the same content.
And on the API binding, hash is what you're accepting. So the same.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that makes sense. But does this, in general, this approach, like these two parts where we have opinionated in core publishing method behind feature flag because we don't want people unintentionally DDoSing cache server. So you have to enable this functionality like this API in a cache server. And the second one is aggregation where you have this endpoint slice. Cool. So any other comments on this? Another one which Marvin raised. We settled at some point an object published resource. And I totally forgot that this is what we use in API sync agent as a object too, which is heavily now used in KCP context. So before we merged it, we need a new name.
I still think cached resource might be good enough.
Fine with me.
Okay, so cached resource, and in the cache, because we do this schemeless approach, in a cache server, it will be cached object. So this is a user interacted one. This would be the schemaless type, basically. So for people to understand why we need this schemaless type is when you have objects like this, virtual machine or something, the cache server doesn't know this type. It doesn't register in there. So we need to convert into some well-known type with a well-known name so we could store them in a cache server. And that would be cached object with a known name and known patterns to query them. But virtual workspace should unwrap these things and serve them in our original form. Cool. Okay, this was way quicker because we already discussed this a few times. Nilo, next one is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, the question is basically during, I think, the last rebase to 132, the question came up if we want to instantiate protobuf support. I looked into it, and well, we have to update the code generation. We have to update all of our types with protobuf struct tags. And it's a continuous effort to keep this up, because we have to, in the future, we will have to keep adding protobuf tags and update them when we update and change types. And on top of that, JSON is still the default, so it's an opt-in. Yeah, Stefan. Yeah.
So for which types is that? Not for our own, right? Or do
Yes,
we have
for our
protobuf?
own. For everyone, everything else is enabled by default, so it works just out of the box with the native types, as long as the client requests it.
So for native, it's clear, but which of our own types? I'm just curious because everything which is an export, so old tendency is export based, right? Their protobuf is probably wrong, like technically wrong, because schemas can change. So if we enable that, then we have a technical problem, I think.
Well, the client would have some waiting in there anyway, meaning if a client requests protobuf, the client cannot expect all types to be protobuf capable. Let's put it like that. So they will have to request a weighted or prioritized content types, which is also part of thing. I think in the first link,
This one, right?
in the last comment, sorry. That's just the references. The architecture says explicitly that protobuf encoding is also accepted for built-in resources. Other resources may provide protobuf, but they don't have to. Yeah,
And in cubes, they don't in practice.
unless the client explicitly requests protobuf. Yeah.
No,
And
I mean,
it's-
CRDs don't support proto, so it's never
Yeah.
support.
Yeah, exactly.
So
CRDs don't, just the built-in types support protobuf.
so we would need to add protobuf stanzas to every resource, every API we maintain to support this.
If we want to have a benefit from protobuf, yeah. As I said, protobuf by itself works. So KCP, if you start a KCP server and you configure your client with protobuf and you just write and read, for example, config maps, that works just fine. But as soon as you try to write something that is not a standard standard object with a client that requests protobuf, it will fail. And
I'm
Mhm.
unclear what the ask is. So
the
coming
question
back,
is, Mhm.
yeah, coming
The
back
question-
to
yeah,
so everything which is not native, cube native, like config maps and stuff, is served by the CRD API server, the API extension API server, which in Cube doesn't support protobuf at all. We have some exception. I think if you create a CRD which fakes a Cube pot or something like that, I think that gets a Cube protobuf. There's a patch in the rebase. And I wonder, so first of all, do we still want that? Is anybody using that? So could we remove this patch? So the opposite of what you asked for, I think.
I'm against putting in the effort for protobuf support for our types because it's a lot of extra work for a little game.
Okay.
It's just that I wanted to bring this up instead of just saying in the ticket, it doesn't make sense and closing it. I just wanted to, not put it up for discussion. Yeah.
Plus one not to do it.
So let's take it like this. Where's the notes? decision not to do this. If there is a requirement, revisit this meeting and basically discussion. Like nobody asking this. We ran into this during the rebase. We said we're gonna revisit it. We revisit that. Fine.
Wonderful.
So if somebody asks it, we can basically come back to this, but let's not do something people don't ask me for.
Perfect. All right. Thanks.
Cool. Last one will be, I think, from my side too. So we had this long time ago, API export URL being deprecated. And basically, I started a PR where we disable population of the URL, but I still add a feature flag, so not to catch people off guard. Meaning, it's disabled by default. Where is the document? API export URL will not be populated anymore. If explicitly not enabled feature flag, which we can remove in the next release. The user experience thing, which I ran into the issue, is basically automatically create API export endpoint slice when API export is created if special annotation label is not provided to skip the creation. So is this okay for everybody? Like, is this fine approach? If not, we can just continue with this. Okay. Cool. And with this, we run out of agenda items. Any other topics on questions people want to bring? Like open floor. Going once. Don't be shy. Going twice. Cool. If nothing else, I think we can close the community call. So like I checked the issues before the call. Most of the issues are about the topics we discussed here or the in progress activities. So there is no external new tickets raised. So we're good at that front. So if no more questions and no more topics, thank you for attending. That was very informative and interesting call for me at least. And enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.